What's going on, everybody? RJ Ochoa here from SB Nation's bloggingtheboys.com. Hope all is well wherever you are. Hope you're happy, safe, healthy, and want to wish you a very, very Merry Christmas, whoever you are, however you are, wherever you are. I hope Christmas was wonderful for you, and it's been wonderful for you. I hope you got what you wanted. I hope you've eaten plenty. I hope you've done what you wanted to do, accomplished what you wanted, and I hope that you're looking forward to the new year and hopefully a better year for the Dallas Cowboys. If you don't know who I am, I cover the Dallas Cowboys for SB Nation. Check out bloggingtheboys.com 24/7, 365. This is a leap year, though, so 366. Don't forget that last day. You can follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at RJ Ochoa, TikTok, RJ.Ochoa. Search me on Blue Sky, or make sure to follow me here in the Bleacher Report app. I use this app all the time, every single day, to keep track of all my sports teams, which, yes, includes Manchester United. Thursday was a bummer of a day, Boxing Day. The Wolves, man, how is this possible? I mean, but whatever. We're not here to discuss one disappointing team of mine. We're here to discuss another. Next week, hopefully, is a much better one for me as an Arizona State Sun Devil. But that being said, the Dallas Cowboys are set to visit the Philadelphia Eagles on Sunday afternoon in a game that got flexed back because the Cowboys are boring. They're mathematically eliminated from playoff contention, and the Eagles are all but effectively entrenched into the number 2 seed in the NFC playoffs. Obviously, they have yet to officially and formally clinch the NFC East, but it feels like just a matter of time. Maybe if the Cowboys manage to win on Sunday and get to 500 for the first time in forever, maybe the Falcons will do the Eagles' dirty work for them and beat the Commanders on Sunday Night Football, and then Philly will win the division regardless. But that being said, the Cowboys are about 2 weeks now from having to make a decision. Today is obviously the day after Christmas. It's Thursday, December 26th. Importantly, it is the Thursday of week 17. This is the penultimate week of the regular season. We know the Cowboys are not going to be involved in the playoffs, which means next week is the final week of the regular season, which means 2 weeks from now, there's no more games. There's no more anything. We have less than 2 weeks to go until Black Monday, when different NFL coaches will obviously be fired. We obviously have some openings, some coaches that have already been fired in New Orleans with the Jets, the Chicago Bears. Obviously, you get the picture. And so whether or not the Cowboys get on that list or not remains to be seen. Now, if the Cowboys do ultimately land on the list of teams looking for a new head coach, it won't be because they fire Mike McCarthy. He's in the final year and therefore final weeks of his contract with the team. The Cowboys will, just like they did with Jason Garrett, choose not to renew his contract. In case you don't know, or in case you don't remember, that was the specific verbiage the Cowboys had 5 years ago when they did not bring Jason Garrett back. It was that they did not renew his contract. And I'm talking about 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks from now is the wild card round, right? 2 weeks from now, we're going to have 6 different games getting, ready to get off the ground, right? 6-3 in each conference. So 12 different teams getting ready for the first round of the playoffs. And that week, 5 years ago, the Cowboys didn't do anything. While other NFL teams were already interviewing people to be their new head coach, the Dallas Cowboys did nothing of the sort. They let Jason Garrett just kind of sit there. And it wasn't until wild card weekend that they finally, formally announced that they would not be bringing him back. So even though I said the Cowboys are going to have to make a decision in 2 weeks' time, they may not wind up doing so. But I'm here to say that I think really retaining Mike McCarthy is the best option. Now, I know that is an unpopular idea for a lot of people, but that's what we're here to parse through and figure out and kind of sort through. So let's take a look at the latest rumors. What you're looking at is an article I wrote at bloggingtheboys.com earlier this week. The Athletic's Diana Rossini said on her podcast with Chase Daniel, Scoop City, that she was hearing from people around the NFL that Mike McCarthy was going to be safe for 2025. You can see the exact quote there. I've spoken to people around the league who believe that Mike McCarthy will be safe. Some of this, I think, has to do with the situation around McCarthy. Some of this has to do with the situation relative to the entire NFL. Some of this has to do with what Mike McCarthy, I think, is doing as of late. Some of this, I think, has to do with what Mike McCarthy has done over the life of his time with the Dallas Cowboys. It's a very difficult thing to sort through, but you get a lot of people who don't want to do that. A lot of people who want to say he sucks, his play calling's bad, his teams aren't disciplined, like people who just repeat things that they see on Facebook and don't hear from, educated people. Not saying I'm fully educated on this, on anything, but you get my point. We're a little bit more contextualized than that. And so that being said, let's examine what Mike McCarthy has done over the course of his almost 5 seasons with the Dallas Cowboys. We're looking at the Cowboys franchise log on Pro Football Reference. Oops, I clicked the wrong tab. Let's zoom in a little bit closer here. Mike McCarthy took over as the Dallas Cowboys head coach in 2020. Dak Prescott broke his ankle. Obviously, that goes without saying that they were going to be a much poorer team in the aftermath of it all. But if you recall, the Cowboys did not just, lay down in 2020 when Dak Prescott got hurt. Andy Dalton was the quarterback, and they even had to play a game without him. Obviously, that's how the world got introduced to Ben DiNucci on Sunday Night Football against the Eagles. But the Cowboys were in the mix, technically speaking, until their final game in Week 17 at the time. This was back when there were only 16 games in the regular season. Cowboys went to New York. They lost to the Giants. And then the Giants threw just the biggest fit of all time because Doug Peterson threw the final game of the regular season. And Washington, the Washington football team at the time, won the division with a below 500 record. But the point stands that Mike McCarthy lost his franchise quarterback. We were willing to give him, obviously, some slack for that year. And obviously, 2020 was a difficult year in every which way. So 2021, all right, things finally start to take off. Micah Parsons lands, Dan Quinn lands. They win 12 games, 12 games, 12 games each of the last 3 years, 3 straight playoff appearances. Now, I want you to look at this column. This column lost, wild card lost. I know they've lost. Look how long it had been. Look how long it had been since the Cowboys had been in the playoffs 3 consecutive years before last year. Now, the Cowboys obviously missing out this year, but 1996 was the last time that the Dallas Cowboys were coming off of a playoff appearance streak of at least 3 straight seasons. Obviously, they went to the playoffs 6 years in a row. So Mike McCarthy brought some serious stability to this team in that specific time frame. There are a lot of people who don't like to give him credit for this, and in the same breath will say that Dak Prescott sucks, and the same breath will say that Jerry Jones interferes. Like something I tell people all the time, and you probably hear this or have heard this. Maybe you've been hearing it this week from a family member or whatever around the Christmas holiday, dinner table, whatever. But what we hear all the time as Dallas Cowboys fans is Dak Prescott sucks. He's not a good quarterback, right? These are things we hear. I'm not saying necessarily things that I agree with or you agree with, but Dak Prescott sucks. Mike McCarthy sucks. Jerry Jones sucks. Everybody sucks, right? The Cowboys have won more games than most teams over the Mike McCarthy era. Obviously, we're understanding of the fact that Dak Prescott got hurt in 20 and got hurt this season, but in that 3-year run, only the Kansas City Chiefs had won more games than the Dallas Cowboys. I know the Cowboys didn't have the playoff success to show for it. I'm not here to make that argument because the argument doesn't exist. But my point is that it can't be true that everything sucks if they're that successful. And then you hear people say things like, well, they play in a soft division. The division's terrible. The division's trash. They're just benefiting from this. Yet those same people, and look, I hate the Eagles with all of me, and this isn't about that, but those same people will elevate what the Eagles are doing. So this all can't be true. It can't be true that the division sucks and the Eagles are great and the McCarthy sucks and the Dak sucks and the Jerry sucks. Something has to be very good. In fact, I would offer that a lot of things have to be very good for them to have been as successful as they've been over the last now almost 5 years. I would add that something has to be very good for the Cowboys to have stood up and gotten off the mat when they fell to 3-7 this year and rallied to the point. I understand some of the competition was of lower quality, but it's still the NFL. To get to the point now where if they win on Sunday, they're 500. Think about that. If the Cowboys win on Sunday at Philadelphia, they are 500. They were 3-7, and they are a game away from potentially, hypothetically, maybe possibly being 8-8. So it is a crazy world that we're living in. And if we do want to kind of lay things out for a little bit here and look at the future and cast into that, we don't know whether or not Jalen Hurts is going to play, obviously, but I think he isn't based on current odds. The odds have the line, I should say, has lowered. Philly opened as a 9.5-point favorite. It's down, I believe, to 7 now. That's some significant movement, which would suggest that Jalen Hurts is not going to play. Beyond the fact that Jalen Hurts may or may not play, Philadelphia doesn't totally need this game. They need to clinch the NFC East, don't get me wrong, but they have 4 technical opportunities to do that by winning either of their final 2 games or Washington dropping either of their final 2. And for that matter, if the Eagles do wind up winning the division this week, especially if they lose and Washington loses, then Washington has no real thing to play for next week either. It's possible the Cowboys draw 2 lame ducks, so to speak, in their final 2 games of the regular season and actually finish with a 9-8 record. That's besides the point, though. That's hypothetical. What we're talking about now is real, is actual, is objective. Let's put this back on your screen here. And I think that people hold, and this happens with more than just Mike McCarthy. It happens with Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons and everybody who wears the uniform these days. But people are holding the sins of the past onto Mike McCarthy. I mean, look, they're holding all of this. They're putting it all on Mike McCarthy. Now, look, I argued and advocated after the Cowboys lost to the Packers in the playoffs for the Cowboys to move on. They didn't, and they made that bed, and they made it in the most dysfunctional way possible. And we're here now almost a year later as a result of it all. But I will say that Mike McCarthy, in his press conference following the embarrassment last playoff year to the Green Bay Packers, he said something that I think was very important. He was asked, obviously, about the failures of the organization, and he said, look, we take no responsibility for what happened before we got here. He said this franchise is, I'm paraphrasing now, but is in a shadow, is in a drought, and it's unfortunate. But what happened between 1996 and through 2019, Mike McCarthy shouldn't answer for. We shouldn't sit here and penalize him, obviously, for not winning the Super Bowl in 5 years. I understand what the expectations were, but I want you to think, I want you to consider as I pull something else up here. I didn't have this planned, but I'm finding it on the fly because I'm extraordinarily talented. Earlier this year, before the season began, the Miami Dolphins, and I'm not trying to say the Cowboys should compare themselves to the Miami Dolphins, but the Cowboys, unlike the Miami Dolphins, did not show a belief in their head coach. Before this season, the Miami Dolphins gave Mike McDaniel a new contract extension. Before this season happened, okay? So the Miami Dolphins were coming off of these 2 years, what you see in front of you, 2023 and 2022. This was it. This is what the Dolphins felt like was so impressive that they had to bring Mike McDaniel back. They had to give him an extension. And you know what? Good for them. Good for the Dolphins. They say, you know what, Mike? We understand that you went 9-8, you went 11-6, you made the playoffs each of your first 2 years. That's very, very, very hard to do. We're going to give you a brand new extension now. I maintain a take of mine is that Mike McDaniel is kind of overrated. Like, I know everybody thinks he's cool, but that's besides the point. The point here is that the Dolphins showed a level of belief in Mike McDaniel that they probably should have shown in Brian Flores, if we're being honest. I mean, 10-6, 9-8, 9-8, 11-6, whatever. We're not here to rehash the Dolphins. That's not what we're kind of doing here today. My point here is, if you're evaluating things objectively, if you're able to separate the way you assess this from the drought that the Cowboys are in, if you are willing to not hold the sins of the past against Mike McCarthy, something he was nothing to do with, something he had no part in, then I think that you would objectively say that what he's done has been impressive. And then when we add the context of how the Cowboys did absolutely nothing to help him over the course of last offseason, not only did they do nothing by way of free agency, that has been a pattern of behavior that they've exhibited for a very, very, very long time now. One that, if we're being fair and calling a spade, Jason Garrett suffered from as well. This organization, this front office has set up coaches to fail time and time and time again. Consider that they let Jason Garrett ride out 2 different contracts with them, and they're letting Mike McCarthy ride out another. That's not the way that stable front offices generally tend to operate. It's exemplified by how the Miami Dolphins gave Mike McDaniel the contract extension following his first 2 years that resulted in playoff appearances. So as we get back to the Mike McCarthy of it all, again, I understand this season has gone south. I'm not here to defend the totality of the 2024 Dallas Cowboys season, because you've seen from me here in the Bleacher Report app and everything that I do, everything I write and have on the internet, that I have not been a fan of the way the Dallas Cowboys have conducted business this year. But if we assess, again, the whole of what Mike McCarthy has done over his tenure, if we assess, again, that he has brought some level of stability and I would say even respectability to the football operations of who this team is, and if we apply the context of, well, he's not really getting any help from the most important people relative to his job in terms of the front office, I think it's really impressive. I'm not saying we throw the guy a parade or anything like that, but I can't imagine how you think it is in the best interest of this team to move on, especially because as we get to the next part of this discussion, and this is all likely why Diana Russini and everybody else is hearing that Mike McCarthy is likely going to be safe. Who is out there? Who is the person? Who is the candidate, the coach, the coordinator, the whatever you want to call it, that you're going to move this mountain for, that you are going to change everything about and assess, what you're doing of in the name of? Because I'm not seeing who that person is. Let's take a look at a list actually that Bleacher Report had a few weeks ago. This is now on your screen. These are coordinators specifically, but 8 coordinators. This was back a couple of days ago, December 23rd. 8 coordinators who should be the top head coaching candidates in the 2025 hiring cycle. These are, once again, just coordinators. Let's see. By the way, as we're here, let's take a break here. Let's pause this right now. Let's get a tweet up on your screen. There's some breaking news here. 1 second. We're pivoting. We can do it like Ross and Friends. Pivoting. This is a tweet from my buddy Nick Harris of DallasCowboys.com. This is about the current state of the Dallas Cowboys. The tank may be on. The code red may have been initiated. You're seeing this tweet once again, Nick Harris from the Fort Worth Star Telegram. Dallas Cowboys wide receiver CeeDee Lamb was not seen, by the way, at the early portion of Thursday's practice, the portion that was open to members of the local media. But CeeDee Lamb had additional testing, on his shoulder this week and is out for the remaining 2 games of the season per the team. So first of all, T's and P's if you have him in your fantasy playoffs and you're going for the championship this weekend. I say that sarcastically because T's and P's are obviously necessary for CeeDee Lamb. He has gutted this thing out. He has played very admirably over the course of the last, who knows at this point in time, through the shoulder issue, just getting all sorts of damage, you would think kind of on a play-in, play-out basis, really obvious throughout last week's win against the Buccaneers, without his franchise quarterback, with no help opposite of him. I mean, it has been CeeDee Lamb and some dudes as far as the Dallas Cowboys passing attack has been concerned, basically for a year and a half at this point, let alone just this specific season. So CeeDee Lamb, I mean, I'm not wearing a cap, but I would tip it to you. I do tip it to you because he has been incredible. And I joked, I spoke tongue-in-cheek about how the tank may be on. I think that last week, in case you missed the timeline of it all, the Commanders beat the Eagles in the noon window of Sunday's games. And it was that game, that moment, that finalized or formalized, crystallized that Dallas was officially eliminated from playoff contention. If you follow me on Twitter, again, at RJ Ochoa, X, whatever, you saw that I shared in that moment right after that officially happened. Okay, the Cowboys are eliminated from the playoffs. We don't need to see Cooper Rush anymore. It's time to see Trey Lance. And I stand by that thought in general, but I think if we're fair to what we saw last Sunday night, obviously CeeDee Lamb played very well, as mentioned. It was very difficult for the Cowboys to call an about face, 6 hours before or 4 hours before kickoff and say like, oh, we're just going to, we're fully going to tank now. I understand why the Cowboys obviously went about things against Tampa that they did, because they practiced all week long under the idea, under the guise, whatever, that they were still going to be battling for a playoff spot. It just didn't work out that way. And so that being said, now that the Cowboys are fully, officially, absolutely 100% unequivocally out of the playoff picture, I think this is why it makes sense to shut down players like CeeDee Lamb. You could have certainly made the argument. I'm not, ignoring that idea. You could have, in my mind, logically argued ahead of last Sunday night against Tampa, even ahead of the Panthers game or ahead of whatever game you want to say, that CeeDee Lamb, that it would be in his best interest to shut him down and start playing for 2025. But I understand why a professional football team, a professional locker room, a professional offense, professional coaching staff, you get my point. I understand how it's difficult for them to wave the white flag when there's still a pulse of an opportunity for you to ultimately pull off the impossible. And now with that ultimately not being possible in an official and undisputed sort of sense, I think this is why we're seeing this. This is why we're seeing that CeeDee Lamb's not going to play anymore. I wouldn't be shocked now, obviously, if we see Trey Lance maybe next week against Washington in the season finale is when we get that. But it does seem like the Cowboys now are, in their own way, finally waving the white flag. And again, you can't really blame them for that because obviously they were officially eliminated from playoff contention. Let's see here. I am making sure I don't miss anything else about CeeDee Lamb. No, everything's good. Not everything's good, but everything is what it is. CeeDee Lamb, though, I think deserves all pro consideration. And obviously should be a Pro Bowler. Obviously wouldn't play in it if he's shut down for the season. But what we saw from CeeDee Lamb this past season was remarkable. In fact, let's get some CeeDee stats up on the screen here for you. So CeeDee Lamb, obviously the Cowboys were dumb and waited forever to obviously sign him to an extension prior to the season beginning. They waited forever and ever. You know that obviously by now. This is CeeDee Lamb here in 2024. This is CeeDee. So let's start here. This is the first. This is week one. It goes in ascending order. I mean, it took a little bit of time for the offense to ultimately find itself. I think we all know that relative to this season. But CeeDee Lamb, the San Francisco game was amazing. And then this is where Dak Prescott gets hurt, obviously, in the Atlanta game. After this, look at what CeeDee has done ever since these last few games. I don't want to click on one of the games and go away from the screen. This is CeeDee Lamb without his franchise quarterback this season. I mean, look at the targets. I mean, finally, the Cowboys waking up. It wasn't until here that the Cowboys started to see consistent, or they decided to have some consistent usage and utilization for CeeDee Lamb. But, I mean, these last 2 weeks, these two games actually, at Carolina and Tampa Bay, CeeDee went north of 100 yards, as you can obviously see. That was the first time in CeeDee Lamb's career that he ever posted back-to-back 100-yard games where a quarterback other than Dak Prescott was the quarterback for both of those games. He had kind of done it 3 years ago in 2021. If you recall, when the Cowboys went to New England, they beat the Patriots. It was the first time ever they beat Bill Belichick. He posted over 100 yards in that game, but Dak Prescott got hurt. That was the calf issue. And then a week later, he did it again in Minnesota against the Vikings, but that was the singular game that Cooper Rush played that year in 2021. So, I mean, a really heroic, gritty, tough, epic, football-y sort of performance and run from CeeDee Lamb as of late. He has certainly earned an offseason op, especially having to deal with all the crap last offseason about the Cowboys waiting forever and ever and ever to get the extension done, having to wait for Justin Jefferson's deal to get done. Ultimately, it was all just a waste of time. If the Cowboys had just been proactive about everything like we begged them to forever and ever and ever and continue to beg them to, then it wouldn't have happened that way. But of course, they're the Cowboys. That is exactly how they wanted it to go, so they could remain making headlines, making news, generating attention, et cetera, et cetera. But CeeDee Lamb officially done for the season now, according to multiple reports. This is the wording from, here we go. Let me get this tweet up on your screen now. I'm moving, I'm clicking, I'm dancing around. I'm trying not to shut down the conversation that you and I are having. I can do this. Here is a statement, according to NFL Network's Ian Rappaport, sharing the statement on your screen now. I'm reading this for the first time. A statement from the Cowboys on star wide receiver CeeDee Lamb, who has been fighting through a shoulder injury most of the season. Additional examinations and scans this week on CeeDee Lamb's shoulder have determined that his injury has now progressed to a point that he will be listed as out for the remaining 2 games of the season. He will undergo a process of treatment and rehabilitation for this shoulder, is not currently expected to require surgery, and is projected to make a full recovery. Again, this makes complete and total logical sense for the Cowboys, given where they're now officially at in their season. I know that you're all going to say they've been out, they weren't going to make the playoffs anyway, you're dreaming. I'm not telling you that I thought the Cowboys were going to make the playoffs. I'm telling you that they still had a mathematical chance of doing so at this time last week, which is why they win at everything the way that they did. And so now I wouldn't even say that they waved the white flag. The white flag was thrusted upon them. So with the white flag flying in the air, they have nothing else to do but react to it. And so they're officially moving on. They're accepting that CeeDee Lamb isn't going to be able to help them make a Cinderella sort of playoff run. And this is what makes the most sense. And that's why, again, I think it isn't impossible. We shouldn't rule out the opportunity or the idea of seeing Trey Lance. And I wouldn't even say just Trey Lance, maybe the idea of seeing Deuce Vaughn get more work. I mean, the idea of Ryan Flournoy getting more work. And ultimately, that's what we want, isn't it? Ultimately, what we want, if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, and if you're not, I can't imagine how or why you would be here, but I welcome you nonetheless. If you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, you want these last 2 games to be glorified preseason games. We need to gather and garner up as much information as we possibly can for the future. We need to make sure and ensure that this type of season doesn't ever happen again. And I don't want to say that the blame for this falls completely at the feet of the front office. I'm going to put about 95% of the blame at the feet of the front office. It's certainly fair to say that injuries have impacted this season. It's certainly fair to put some criticism on Mike McCarthy, who we were talking about for a little bit before the CeeDee Lamb news obviously happened and we had to discuss it. And I think it's fair to say Dak Prescott wasn't playing well. All these things are really fair. But the biggest issue, the biggest piece of the pie that Stephen Jones loves to blame everything on falls on the fact that the Cowboys did nothing in free agency. And so this ultimately takes us to a place where you have to learn from that, guys. You can't just sit there and do nothing, like Jim Halpert once very famously, perhaps infamously, told Michael Scott when they swapped roles. You have to act like a real, tried and true, legitimate NFL operation. And if you don't, then, well, you're really only doing yourselves a disservice. You're really only setting yourselves up to fail, to fall to 3-7 with the world laughing at you. And maybe, just maybe, you have a head coach and a group and a staff and a roster that is kind of not going to let that stand anymore and is going to do what they can to save everything, which is what this team has done, which, again, ultimately is why I think that Mike McCarthy deserves some consideration to return as the Cowboys head coach in 2025. And I'm going to get back to what we were talking about a minute ago, the coordinators who were options, because I think that's important context. This is important to understand what options are potentially available. This was the list that we were sharing when the CeeDee news broke. These are coordinators. Again, you could talk about, obviously, Pete Carroll's name has popped up. I mean, there are Mike Vrabel's name. These are not coordinators, but Todd Monken is a name. Joe Brady is a name. I can't see the Cowboys going that route. Aaron Glenn, former Cowboy, that's worth mentioning. Ben Johnson is an obvious one. Brian Flores is a former head coach. We talked about the Dolphins, obviously, under his watch. Kellen Moore, that one I understand the connection the Cowboys obviously have to him in the past. Liam Cohen, I can't see the Cowboys going with a hotshot young, name guy, because that's not what they like to do. I mean, maybe if they're going to do that and go that route with that sort of archetype, it would be Kellen Moore because he has a history with the team. I don't know how people would react to Kellen returning after a successful run with the Philadelphia Eagles, but it does make sense. I think, though, to kind of tie a bow on this whole discussion, one of the most important elements of considering whether or not the Cowboys should move on, this sounds like this sounds lame. Just it's the best way to put it. People hear what I'm about to say, and they say things like, "Oh, the standard used to be so much higher. The standard is the Super Bowl for the Cowboys." Never mind the fact that the standard clearly hasn't been the Super Bowl for the Cowboys for almost 3 decades now, but that's neither here nor there. An important part of assessing whether or not you're going to make a move, whether you're not going to pursue a new head coach, is whether or not you think you can get your guy. Right? You can pick up the names that we just looked through. Pick up a name that's not even on there. Do you think that the Cowboys are the belle of the ball? Do you think the Cowboys are the team that if you were if you were the hottest name on the market, if you were Ben Johnson and you had your pick of all the open jobs, would the Cowboys be at the top of your list? Would they be number 2? I think we all can understand that Chicago is kind of generally the top of most people's list. But this is also an important list to look at. This is also from Bleacher Report. This is a little bit further back. This was right after Thanksgiving. Potential NFL head coach openings after the Matt Eberflus firing. So there were 7 jobs, obviously, right then that they ranked. The Jets were last, so the Jets aren't necessarily a contender. The Saints, you're stuck with Derek Carr. I don't know why you would want to do that. We get to the Raiders. We have no idea what that's going to look like, but they've taken themselves in all likelihood out of the range or territory for their preferred quarterback, at least. The Giants also going to be in a crummy situation, although if they have the number 1 overall pick, that certainly changes the calculus of everything involved. Top 3 options, the Jaguars. Yes, you have Trevor Lawrence, but the Jaguars kind of whatever. Number 2, the Dallas Cowboys. Maybe they are that high. And then number 1, obviously, is the Chicago Bears. So if we live in this world where this ranking is the one that is determining the assessment or how other coaches, how would-be coaches, how candidates have assessed the pool of potential available options, you are going to, let's kind of lay this math out for you here. You're going to move on from a head coach who the team doesn't want you to move on from, first and foremost, who has had a lot of success, if you're willing to, again, evaluate it fairly, who has demonstrated that he can survive and thrive in chaos like you not helping him and all the injuries that have happened to his team. And obviously the first year where the whole world was what it was, that's an admirable quality that he can handle all of that. A coach who, again, took you to the playoffs 3 years in a row for the first time since the mid-'90s. I know that the mid-'90s feel like 10 years ago to us millennials, but it was actually a very long time ago. And so that Mike McCarthy did that is impressive nonetheless. You're going to move on from that guy. That's the first step of the calculus involved. And then you're going to whittle down a list of people. And remember, if you are somebody who is advocating for the Cowboys to move on from Mike McCarthy, that the last time when we all advocated for them to move on from Jason Garrett, they interviewed 2 people. That's not a joke. That's not a lie or anything. They interviewed 2 people when they hired Mike McCarthy. They interviewed Mike McCarthy and Marvin Lewis. That was it. That was the whole list of people. So again, I'm not saying you shouldn't want to move on out of some sort of fear or something, but I'm saying understand what we're working with here. Understand the material that we're trying to make something out of here. The last time the Cowboys did this, they interviewed 2 people. So you might feel like I don't know, Cliff Kingsbury as an option. He may not even get the call to be interviewed because they will have their sights set on somebody and be determined to make that move regardless of whoever you want them to interview. And recall that the last time before Mike McCarthy, when they interviewed head coaches, they had an in-house candidate that they were already going to give the job to in Jason Garrett. The last time they had a true, I would say, open competition, so to speak, for a head coach was Wade Phillips, who they hired in 2007. And obviously that was even kind of handicapped in the sense that they hired their offensive coordinator, Jason Garrett, before they hired Wade Phillips. It has been a very, very, very long time since they have had a purely democratic process for a head coach. So be careful what you wish for is my point. But even then, even if you're willing to crawl through that entire part of the tunnel, then you reach a point where you are maybe at best the number 2 team on your candidates list. So now you have to convince this dude, whoever it ultimately is, to come coach your team who you think has a quarterback who sucks, who you think has an owner who sucks, who you think has a front office who sucks. Again, I'm not saying don't move and be paralyzed out of fear, but what I am saying is understand the context of the situation here and how likely this or that is or isn't. You have to understand the dynamics at play because we're about 2 weeks, like I said, from these things becoming a potential hypothetical reality. And if you are not prepared for that potential reality, then I have not done my job, which is what I'm here to do. And that's educate you on all matters Dallas Cowboys. Whoo! That was a very interesting conversation that I enjoyed a lot, and I hope you did as well. Once again, my name is RJ Ochoa. You can follow me here in the Bleacher Report app or on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Threads at RJ Ochoa, TikTok, RJ.Ochoa. Search me on Blue Sky. Email is also rj.ochoa@sbnation.com. I hope you all had a very Merry Christmas, and I will be here after Sunday's Dallas Cowboys game against the Philadelphia Eagles for our live post-game show. I look forward to chatting with you then. Until then, though, I bid you all adieu. I hope you have wonderful leftovers. I hope you enjoy Thursday night football, Saturday football. I hope you win your fantasy championships, all your parlays hit. I hope you win your pick'em leagues. I mean, it's that time of year. Thank you so much for checking out any kind of content that I make. It really means the world to me. I enjoy talking about the Dallas Cowboys and enjoy doing so with you. For now, I'm going to get out of here, and I hope that you have the best day ever. You know why? Because you deserve it. We'll see you next time, my friends. Thanks so much for hanging out.